Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Stories about life in the Soviet Union. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи! В эфире программа Ushanka Show. Today's episode is a part 16 of my book review, Black on Red by Robert Robinson, My 44 Years Inside of the Soviet Union. If you're new to my channel, I have a separate playlist dedicated to this book, and as I said, we have 15 episodes looking in detail and experiences of American engineer Robert Robertson, who spent 44 years inside the USSR. Today we're going to look at the chapter 23, which is called Malenkov, Beria, and Khrushchev. But before we begin, I would like to do something. I would like to throw some rocks into the Tankys Garden. So we have this expression in Russian language, бросать камни в чужой огород, to throw rocks in someone else's garden. So by throwing rocks in the other person's garden, you make his work harder. Because now when he plows or digs, he's gonna hit those rocks. So like whatever your actions are, you make other person's life harder. So this is what I want to do today. I want to throw some rocks into the Tankys Garden. Quite often I see these comments on my own channel, as well as when I visit Reddit, I see similar comments on like Socialism 101 and other subreddits that if Comrade Stalin were still alive, Soviet Union will be going strong and doing well. And I'm not sure those people realize, and those people that we'll call them tankies, that statement, that comment, they admit that Soviet Union was doomed from day one because no one lives forever. And if you think that Soviet Union could only survive if Stalin would be alive, you mean you admit there's like no chance Soviet Union would be successful state under anyone else leadership except Comrade Iosif Stalin. So that's my first point. My second point, if Comrade Stalin was such a great leader, why he never planned for his death? Because he was a smart guy, he knew he couldn't live forever, so he never bothered to prepare his replacement. I mean, we're not talking about free elections in the Soviet Union, right? So this chapter 23 kind of shows what kind of mess the Soviet Union and Soviet government was after the death of Stalin, because he surrounded himself with bootlickers and butt kissers. Not a single person was like, okay, this is the guy who will replace me. Okay, so those were my two big boulders that I decided to throw into Tankys Garden, and now let's go back to the book Black on Red. So in the previous episode, we talked about excitement of the Soviet peasants when they learned that Malenkov drastically reduced tax in kind, and thank you people who commented because I had no idea what tax in kind means. So he reduced the taxes that peasants had to pay for owning a cow and a pig. They had to give government meat and milk and potatoes and anything else they grew. So tax was drastically reduced, and I think the previous debts that peasants had, those were forgiven. Alright, so chapter 23. The peasants' jubilation did not last. Before long, without any public explanation, Georgiy Malenkov was removed as first secretary of the Central Committee. Back in Moscow, there was speculation. So once again, no news in newspapers or radio. There was speculation and news about political intrigue within the Politburo and fear that the harshness of Stalinist-type rule would return. The peasants feared that tax in kind would be returned to its previous level and private farming would be abolished. During the time of uncertainty after Malenkov was demoted, a number of people in the factory, including nachalniks, which is bosses, sought me out to learn what the BBC and the Voice of America were saying about events in the Kremlin. And I already made a video about the so-called enemy voices, вражеские голоса. I'll post the link in the comment section. So there was BBC Russian Service, Voice of America, Free Europe, there was Voice of Canada. There was a whole bunch of them that were transmitting programs in Russian language. So how bad the situation is when people asking this American engineer what did he hear on the radio about events in Kremlin. So they live next to Kremlin in Moscow and they have no idea what's going on. They're wondering maybe BBC has more information. This is how bad the situation was in Soviet Union with government controlling 100% all the mass media. Everyone was starved for information. Where was Beria? What was Beria doing? The questions were endless, and so were the rumors. One day it was Malenkov who had been murdered. The next day it seemed he was arrested. Or it was Khrushchev, or Voroshilov, or Bulganin, and so on. I was extremely prudent in dispensing information because I had no way of distinguishing among those earnestly seeking information and the informers. The biggest fear was that if power struggle was going on, Beria would win out. The efficient and ruthless MVD was in his hands. So MVD was a Ministerstvo Внутренних дел, so it's a Ministry of Internal Affairs, so that was KGB and police combined. People imagined that if he also became head of the party, he would turn the country into even greater police state of unimaginable proportion. However, we soon learned that Nikita Khrushchev had become the first secretary of the Central Committee. We knew little about him, so once again, everyone just knew Comrade Stalin and no one else. We knew little about him except that he had been a faithful Stalin underling. All party members in the factory were summoned to a closed-door meeting during lunch period, a few days after the announcement about Khrushchev. By the end of the day, the most important information had been leaked to us, non-party members, that Beria had been arrested and charged with being an imperialist agent. So here we go. Oh my goodness. We were told that he would soon be brought to trial, a closed affair off limits to the people and press. Soviet citizens who become trained never to utter a political opinion in public felt free to curse openly the hated Beria now that he was in jail as an enemy of the state and facing certain executions. Okay, so let's pause for a second and try to imagine that something like that will be going on in the United States. So Joe Biden dies and Kamala Harris becomes president of the United States for a short period of time. Then she gets arrested as an enemy of the state, and they just elect some random guy from the Democratic Party, I guess in this case, and all these rumors going around. That would be insane, right? But that's what was actually happening in the Soviet Union. Okay, now back to the book. Although the Soviet news media had been instructed not to report on Beria's trial, bits of information leaked out now and then. Beria was a person for whom, in a campaign of vilification, additional sins need not be invented. I heard people saying Beria was immoral, but not until I overheard a young man in my factory saying to another, "I think Beria should be hanged by his testicles after defiling so many of our girls." Did I understand what was meant? So Robert Robertson wrote this book back in 1988, way before we got all this information about Lavrentiy Beria and his ways of dealing with women. So he had a weak spot for young college girls, and his guys were patrolling the streets of Moscow and snatching the girls off the streets and bringing him to their boss, where he had sex with them and he preferred the virgins. So that's what the Robert Robertson is talking here. People knew about it. It was going on a regular basis and no one could do anything because he was the most dangerous person in the country, that Lavrentiy Beria guy. And they actually mentioned same fact in the comedy Death of Stalin. So that was the Beria's one of the biggest sins besides being ruthless, I would say, NKVD guy. And then Comrade Robertson goes in a story about his friend, Leonid Nikolaevich, who was the father of a strikingly attractive Russian girl. So this guy was a high school physics teacher in Moscow, and his daughter, just like that, in May of 1944, she was walking on the streets in Moscow. A small car drove behind her and stopped, and a guy came out and he basically told her, "You need to come with me, my boss needs to see you." He flashed his security badge, and the girl was raped. And then Robert Robertson continues that in the final week of December 1953, the Soviet news reported that Beria had been found guilty, surprise, surprise, of being an imperialist agent, sentenced to die and executed. During the time of Beria's trial, his immediate subordinates were swiftly arrested, tried, sentenced, and shot. All their property was confiscated, and the surviving members of their families were sent far away banished from Moscow for life. So that's how Robert Robertson describes the end of Stalin's era and the beginning of brand new era of Nikita Khrushchev. Okay, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching Ushanka Show, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.